Hey, I'm Catiewahwah, and you're watching The Record Review. This week I'm going to be reviewing The Bones of What You Believe by Chvrches. Now Chvrches, you might know, spell their name with a V instead of a U, and they're also a three-piece, so it's like the three Vs. I actually think that the art on the sleeve for the album is really cool as well. So I don't know if you can see, but it's like a sort of really underexposed photo of the three members of Chvrches, and it kind of casts them into these indistinct silhouettes. So you can't really tell who's who, you can't necessarily tell what gender they are, and they have a really similar one on the back that really represents the kind of style of Chvrches. They're a trio, and although they are made up of two men and a woman, they really push this idea of gender neutrality. They are musicians before they are a specific gender, so I really like this like subtle message they've got in the sleeve here. So as I mentioned, Chvrches are a three-piece, and they are originally from Glasgow. Chvrches are made up of Ian Cook, Martin Doherty, and Lauren Maybury. What's really interesting about Chvrches is that they're a band that truly came to fame through social media. They posted their song Lies on a music blog called Neon Gold. They started getting a lot of attention from that and a lot of fans through that, and it was through that sort of homegrown fan attention that they then got the opportunity to actually produce this album, which I think is something that we're going to see more and more of. They still maintain their own social media. They have a really cool presence on Vine, and they also maintain their own Facebook page. And a fun fact about their name, the reason that they're called Chvrches with a V instead of a U is because they were thinking about people Googling them. They've said that they were worried that although they loved the name Chvrches because it sounded cool, they thought people are going to Google it and get pictures of Chvrches. So they decided to spell it with the V so that just the band would come up. They released their first EP, Recover, in March 2013, and then this LP, The Bones of What You Believe, was released in September 2013. So their style is very dependent upon synthesizers. There's lots of sampling, lots of electronic beats, and they've actually been compared to New Order, but it's interesting because they themselves cite influences like Prince, Kate Bush, and Depeche Mode. They're taking influence from those other people but arriving at very similar sounds to New Order. Their single, The Mother We Share, was the one that really got my attention. I think it's just a great summer soundtrack. They are masters at creating really upbeat songs that at the same time have very dark lyrics, and I think that's very cool. They've been described by critics as being accessible electronic, and I definitely agree with that. I think that they have a sound that is not intimidating to somebody who's not used to electronic music. It's very easy to listen to their music and get into the beat and feel like you understand what's going on. You don't need to have a lot of reference points to understand what they're doing, but at the same time, if you do have those reference points, it's quite fun. I also really like the way that Chvrches are so dependent upon synthesizers. They really appreciate the beauty of them. We are at a time in music right now where people are very used to like digital music and auto-tuning and all of that kind of music and not hearing anything natural. And we're also very used to the extreme backlash, which goes very acoustic, very unfiltered. I think that there was a really great moment in the 80s, which Chvrches references, when we were kind of using technology to create music, and it was exciting, and it was something to be optimistic about. Like, wow, we can make all these sounds with machines, and that's fun. Back in the 80s, when we weren't terrified about technology separating us and isolating us, I would actually compare synthesizers to vinyl, because obviously when you listen to a vinyl record, it is not the actual natural state of the music. Like, you're not listening to live music when you listen to vinyl, but at the same time, you're not listening to a digital version of it. You're listening to something in between. It's artificial, but it still feels like it's alive. Another cool thing about Chvrches is that they, as a band, mix everything together. The three of them hole up in this basement studio in Glasgow, and they just focus on getting everything perfectly mixed together. So they're not one of those bands that creates the song and then hands it off to a producer. They have complete control over it, so clearly every beat that they leave in, every note that they leave in, everything that happens in those songs, they meant for it to happen. And you can definitely see that collective, complete control of every song in the way that they treat the vocals throughout the album. Chvrches are definitely not one of those bands who have the vocals kind of sitting above everything else in the mix, but at the same time they're not one of those electronic bands who buries the vocals. They do something in between where the vocals sit at exactly the same level often as the music itself, which suggests that Chvrches as a band think of the vocals as being just another instrument within the mix. So knowing the way that the Chvrches trio have a lot of control over their final mix, and knowing that they put vocals as just being another instrument within the mix, it puts a very different spin on the reason why Mayberry is so often the lead vocalist on tracks. I wonder whether it is because her voice, which is higher pitched and a bit sweeter, complements the lighter and high pitched beats within the songs. And I noticed that in the songs where there's more of a bass tone to them, it's Doherty who takes over lead vocals because his voice has a lot more bass in it and complements the actual final mix a lot better. So that puts a whole new twist on how we interpret Chvrches' lyrics. Because just because there's a female vocalist singing it doesn't necessarily mean that she is the one whose intention it is. The vocals are chosen to complement and echo the beats of the song and to serve the storytelling and experience of the song itself. I think that it's important to mention at this point that Chvrches have openly rejected the traditional marketing techniques that a lot of PR companies tend to use for rock bands with girls in them. So usually PR companies will push the girl to the front and put her in like a really short dress and say, oh, and this band has a girl in it, it's different from other ones, kind of ignoring whatever the dynamic within the band actually is and singling out the woman. And that actually leads to a lot of animosity towards female members of rock bands because they're seen as being given special treatment when often they're just trying to create music. And I really love how Chvrches have this attitude that they don't want Mayberry to be pushed to the front as being the girl in the band. They want to be seen as a trio who are all equal. And again, that's why the sleeve art on this album is so interesting, because if you want to analyze the kind of iconography that Chvrches are using to portray themselves, it's as three different but equal silhouettes. And they are those sort of nondescript silhouettes before they are a gender, which is a really important thing, I think, to have. Just because they don't happen to all be men doesn't mean that they can't all be seen as being the same types of people. It also allows them to make another really cool statement, which is that Lauren Mayberry, whose voice is definitely feminine, it is by no means androgynous, is able to be the representative of three non-gender specific people. So understanding all of that, I think it leads to a really cool interpretation of this album, which is that the intention, lyrics, experience of each track could have come from the imaginations of any or all of the members of Chvrches, which is really cool when we think about one of the songs on the album, Gun. Now, Gun is a classic post-breakup angry song. It has lyrics like, I will be a gun, I am coming for you, and it's sung by Mayberry in quite a sweet voice. I really love the contrast that Chvrches work with throughout the whole album, but especially on Gun, between having this very upbeat music contrasted with actually really dark lyrics. It reminded me a lot of The Smiths, where you find yourself sort of quite jauntily, chirpily singing along to very dark lyrics. I read a music critic talking about Gun and saying how it's very seemingly aggressive lyrics but sung by Mayberry, so then you immediately know that it's an empty threat. First of all, like, that's just wrong, obviously, because why is it that because somebody looks sweet and sounds sweet, they're incapable of aggression? But secondly, that's not even right with Chvrches. Those lyrics could have easily come from the imagination of Cook or Doherty. And if either of those guys was singing those lyrics, it would be a very aggressive song. And I think that the reviewer would have reacted very differently. And I think that Chvrches are probably aware of that. It's really fun on a lot of the tracks to just flip the genders. How would you feel if it was a male vocalist, if it was a female vocalist? Because potentially all of these songs have come from all three of them, or any of the three of them. You can even do that with songs like Lies, which seems very gendered outwardly because Mayberry sings it. I can feed your dirty mind. And then there are also references to feeding someone's dirty mind, which I think we tend to associate with men having dirty minds rather than women. But essentially, the song is about feeling removed from your partner and feeling like they don't really know you and don't really understand you, and that you're just telling them certain things that they want to believe to make them happy, but at the same time, because they're not taking the effort to understand you, you don't feel happy within that relationship. That, I think, is quite universal across men and women. From listening to The Bones of What You Believe, I really got a feeling that the overall theme was all about miscommunication and modern love. As I said, a lot of the lyrics seem to be very gender neutral, so there's this feeling of this sort of universal, complete confusion between all genders. Like, no one really knows what's going on, and everyone tries to be a bit too cool, but at the same time feels very emotional about everything. Everyone's quite evasive about what they're really feeling, while at the same time trying to understand one another. I feel like that feeling of trying to be too cool and it not making you very happy is especially suited to synth pop as a genre and electronic music, because electronic is very much about being a bit too cool to fully emote. Electronic music isn't quite as dramatic as other forms, but at the same time it's nonetheless full of emotion. So it's this idea of restraining yourself and trying to keep up quite a cool facade and not wanting to lose your reputation, but at the same time really believing in it and wishing that it could be something more. There's also definitely a certain darkness to the lyrics and a feeling that things are not really right as they are, but at the same time those vocals are being weighted with music that is literally upbeat. So there's a feeling of like push-pull, constant hopefulness despite darkness. I saw an interview where Mayberry said that her favourite song to perform is Lungs because it's got what she described as quite twisted lyrics, and the song is a bit weird, but it is again to very upbeat music, while at the same time being about being in a love triangle and being confused about what that means. Although it is about a love triangle, it's also about that fear of isolation and the fear of being the part of the triangle that gets cut off. What I love about this album thematically is that I feel like it's really capturing a moment of universal confusion in modern love. We're at a stage where we've broken down a lot of old dating and relationship dynamics, which is good because a lot of those were very sexist and that was not good for women. But at the same time, we haven't quite figured out what the new system is. What I like about The Bones of What You Believe is it feels like a bit of a cathartic release of all of that confusion and angst, and at the same time it's set to a very positive beat, so it's as if even though that is a lot of confusion there's still something positive and hopeful running underneath the whole thing. Something that I find really interesting about Chvrches is that not only in the name of their band, the name of the album, The Bones of What You Believe, and then the titles of some of their songs like The Mother We Share, Science Visions, there's a lot of religious and spiritual imagery going on in there. Chvrches have explicitly said that they don't have any religious or spiritual message to their music. So I do wonder whether they're making a statement about how, in many ways, romantic love and the search for it has become more important to young people than a religion. People are more interested in devoting themselves to one other person than to a specific deity. And because we've put so much pressure on finding that one person, it's almost become a religious experience, a spiritual experience to find your soulmate. In any case, if I ever was to meet Chvrches, that is the question that I would love to ask them. Is that what this album is a statement on? Is that what this album is asking? Is love the new religion? And so, what is the verdict on The Bones of What You Believe? Well, it's going to be 4 stars. I think that this is a really lovely album. It's very easy to get into and kind of sing along with those catchy songs, but it's also got a lot going on underneath, so you can also, if you want to, connect with it on a lot of different levels. And of course, should you get it on vinyl? Yes, if you like that vintage synth vibe anyway, like that sort of 80s sound, because what's really cool about this album is that it definitely does sound different on vinyl as opposed to on digital, and I think that that's because it has a really great adaptable mix. It doesn't sound better or worse on either medium, but if you already like the sound of vinyl and you like the clicks, then it's really great to invest in the vinyl of The Bones of What You Believe. If you're not a big fan of vinyl and you prefer a cleaner digital sound, then go for the digital. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to let me know in the comments what you think of Chvrches and electronic music in general, And also if you have any requests for future reviews. Also, if you're not already and you kind of like what I'm doing on this channel, then be sure to subscribe to me. Next week I'm going to be reviewing Paradise by Lana Del Rey. I know that a lot of you are really excited about that, and I'm really excited about it, and be sure to come back for that. It's gonna be the start of Lanapalooza. Hashtag Lanapalooza. But again, thank you so much for choosing to spend some of your day with me, and I will see you next time. Bye! I think that one of the reasons why Lorde is resonating so strongly with this generation is because she is speaking with and to us.